Hey, good evening, everybody. Good evening, and welcome to our call for tonight. I'm going to turn on my slide presentation, and I'll just kind of say hello, and then I'm going to duck out of here shortly. And good to see you all. And let me just make sure my chat is open. Okay, chat is open. And let me make sure the Q&A is open. And the Q&A is open. Okay. I'm going to talk a little bit about an alternative PLR model, but I do want to start with any questions that you might have. I will want to take questions first, and if not, then I'll get into something that I'll say semi-prepared. uh, it's something that I have been talking about. I talked a little bit about this in today's newsletter. I didn't talk about it in the insider newsletter, but in the newsletter to the PLR show community. And yeah, so any questions? Any questions? Anyone have questions that maybe they want me to take a shot at? And let's see, it's 7:03. If not, my goal is to get you out of here by 7:33. Right, that's my goal. Okay, so let's talk through this then. This is an alternative PLR model, and I shared a little bit about this in the insider newsletter for today. So if this seems like it's going a little too fast or it's a little too different, then make sure you read my newsletter from today. I do want to make mention that I've started the insider training for Successful Leader Toolbox. I did the orientation session. I am opening that up to the public. So if you're not yet an Ultimate Insider, you can still attend Successful Leader Toolbox. You can find out more about that at the plrshow.com/SLT. The orientation session is on that page. It's right there at the top. You can watch it, and then you can get in. This Thursday, we're actually going to be at our doctoral residency. So we won't be starting this Thursday, but it'll be next Thursday. So it'll be at this price until then. As soon as I finish that session next Thursday, I'm going to raise the price, I think by $10. So it's going to go from 27 to 37. And each week that I do a new session, it's going to go up by $10, just so you'll know. So Successful Leader Toolbox, plrshow.com/SLT. And again, I mean, you can obviously get it at no cost if you're an Ultimate Insider. So this is really our opportunity, both Laurel and I together. We said a little while ago we're going to do leadership development with Ultimate Insiders, so that's what we're going to be doing. And so this is free to Ultimate Insiders, obviously. And now the thing about this training is that at the end, I am going to do resale rights. And I haven't figured out exactly how I'm going to do that. It might work a little differently, but there are going to be resale rights to Successful Leader Toolbox, just so you'll know. So if you're trying to make a decision as to whether or not, I don't want to do leadership development, you will be able to teach your customers everything that we do in these sessions. So let's talk about a little bit about, and I talked about this today earlier, about a way of looking at master resale rights. Now, when I say master resale rights, I know that we don't do master resale rights in terms of our content. However, the model that I'm talking about still works, right? It just works a little differently, and we'll talk through it here tonight. And as I said, now to be able to set another customer up with a done-for-you product so that they can sell it, you don't have to buy master resale rights necessarily. If you're not going to do that, you've got to buy one license for your customer and one license for yourself if you're going to use it that way. So you'll know. So everybody's got to have their own license if that's what you're going to do. And yeah, you would be buying two licenses, but one you'd be doing for someone, right? You'd be doing it on their behalf. So every client that you do this for, what we're going to discuss, you need one license. So you can either get a master resale rights license. I don't know a lot of people who do those now. Um, I'm just thinking about the people that, whose products that I have recommended over the last year or so. I don't know of anyone who does master resale rights. Every so often, the folks at Fire Launchers, they will do unrestricted rights. Of course, you can do that with what we're going to be talking about. But in general, most people do resale rights. Um, Now it's going to work different depending on which platform you use. So I will talk to the two platforms that I know of, and there are really only two platforms that I know of you're going to be able to do what I'm talking about here tonight on. Um, so you can either be a go high level agency, right? So it's not necessarily going to be able to do this with just a sub account, but if you're an agency, you'll be able to do what I'm talking about here tonight. Or you've got to have a system.io account, right? Either way, this model that I'm talking about will work in this way. Um, and without being able to, and here's why, right? Here's why you need presently. Now, at some point, maybe somebody will do it. Now, I talked to the folks at Teachable, I think it was a couple weeks back, and they seemed real intrigued by the idea of being able to share a course with someone. I don't know if that means they're going to do it, but they were intrigued by it. They had never even considered, doing that. And so we'll see. We'll see what happens if that goes anywhere. But you need the ability to to share an entire course with someone for them to put it in their course platform. That's what you need the ability to do to make this work. Because otherwise, if you got to redo everything in their account, the logistics on that are a nightmare. Unless you charge a lot of money, I don't know that it's really going to be worth it. Now, obviously, you can go get people to outsource it, but by the time you pay the outsourcer and you've got to charge them a considerable amount in order to do it. So it's not impossible to do, but it can be done, and it's more easily done and easier to sell if you have a share code with the share code capability with your course platform, right? And so that's what really makes this work. It is the sharing features. So the idea that you're going to say to Miss Customer or Mr. Customer, hey, you're a life coach. Wonderful. What I'm going to do is I'm going to set you up with a product that is a life that is a motivational product, right? Let's say that you bought PLR from Dr. Lloyd, and you're going to say, "Hey, Mr. Physical Therapist, I'm going to set you up with a video course so that you can sell to your customers or you can engage your customers inside of your course platform." That's basically the pitch you're going to make. Now, there's one way to do this is to be an agency. So again, this is not necessarily going to work if you just got a sub account. You do need to be an agency. And I will tell you that if you decide you're going to get a Go High Level agency and you get it through our link, I want you to contact me so that I can, I'm not going to talk about what I'll do, but I really do want to hook you up if you get this agency through our link. So let's talk about the scenario and how you'd be doing this if you were an agency in order to do this. You're going to purchase one license of the PLR. Same thing. Now, it does not have to be master resale rights. Now, if it's master resale rights or unrestricted rights, you don't have to purchase separate licenses for every client. If, for example, if you bought our PLR and you wanted to sell it for yourself and you wanted to do this work for a client, this would require you to get a license for them and a license for you, right? So you purchase one license for the customer you're going to be creating the product for. And the trick's always going to be the sales page. Whenever you're using a course platform, the question's always going to be, so how do I get the PLR sales page into the course platform? Because typically, if you got the HTML pages, the only course platform that I know that converts an HTML sales page or any sales page is the platform Convertry. And so I don't think you want to have a Convertry license just for that purpose. So the trick's going to be the sales page. Now, what we've been doing recently is if you have gotten some of our products, um, if you use Go High Level Agency or if you use System.io, you can get our sales page templates and you can make the changes in our sales page templates for the individual products. In fact, we just did survival skills and I just went ahead and did the sales pages for you and I gave those to you. So you could actually use those sales pages, if you're gonna undertake this process. So the trick's gonna be you get the PLR sales page, you've got to get it into the course platform, and then you got to get it from your course platform and share it into your customer's course platform, right? And um, obviously what you're going to do with the video course, and this is going to be, and I'm thinking about Go High Level, you want to personalize that course with some graphics. You could take the PLR graphics and you could personalize each video in the course, and then you're going to basically take a snapshot of your finished product in your agency, right? You take a snapshot and then you're going to share that snapshot into your customer's platform, right? You load the snapshot into your customer sub account. Now, the reason that this works is that the customer is going to be on your agency, right? They're not going to have their own agency. They're going to be in your agency. So you're going to load that snapshot into their site that's already inside of your agency. And now there's some ways you can add value if you want to up the price. So for example, let's say that this is not necessarily fully related to the platform right now. Let's say if you wanted to up the price, you could say you could interview them, right? You could do a third-party interview. So in other words, you can get on camera or do an audio interview. And so if you want to do an audio interview, maybe you charge a little bit more. If they're willing to do an audio interview, then you charge maybe something less than the video interview. Add a quiz, right? Now this is really cool because the high level platform has a certification or a quiz mode. And so you can offer a certificate if they complete the course. And so one thing that you can do is you can set them up with a quiz. And so again, it's another way of upselling and providing them some additional value. So what you're saying to that customer is, not only am I going to give you a course to sell, I'm also going to give you a certification in order to offer to your customers, right? And so you set all that up inside of the course that you're going to share to them. And then you can add survey, right? And so again, all of these are things that you can use in order to upsell. And I'd say that anything you add on, right? You add on an additional $97. So if you sell them the initial package at $197, all these little things, right? You do the interview, do the quiz, do the survey, you allow them to add these on at $97 a pop. Now, and again, you're going to sell all of this as one package, all one package. So again, you're going to bring them on your agency, and you're going to give them the opportunity to have this product. You're going to set them up on their own domain, right? Because you can do that within the Go High Level agency. So in other words, they're going to have their own domain. So yes, they're going to be on your agency, but you're going to use their domain in order to set all this up. Now, here's where it starts to get a little exciting, right? So you've got this agency. Obviously, you've got to pay an agency fee. I think the lowest one is $97, the other one's $297, the other one's $497. So you need to sell them access to this, but they're going to have to pay you, either an annual fee or some kind of monthly fee. So in other words, let's say we sell the service at $197 at the low end, and then we're going to ask them for a maintenance fee. Right. So we're going to ask them for a maintenance fee to keep this up. Now, if all you're going to have is, let's say, one product on there, maybe you charge 37, right? Maybe you charge them $37 a month in order to keep it up. And if they stop paying, obviously, you're going to cut them off. And then they're going to need training on how to operate the entire platform. Well, we've already done videos for you. So if you have an agency, you get our Go High Level agency videos. And again, those videos that I did, now there are tons of people who do videos on Go High Level, right? So white label videos galore. These videos are specific to information marketing in the way we do it. So yes, you can get those videos from any place, but if you want to teach somebody how to use their platform to continually use it for information marketing, our videos will help you to do that. And so a lot of you already have those videos, but if you want to sell them and show them to your customer, you get those videos at the plrshow.com/GHLSA, right? So that's how you do this. That's how you do this with Go High Level. So let's talk about, and now, I think I also said one thing that we're going to be doing is adding a master resale rights tier to Ultimate Insiders. Now, if you're an Ultimate Insider now, you'll get grandfathered into that. Now, and I've been saying this for months. They keep promising, Teachable is promising that they're going to give me the ability to tier the membership. They haven't done it yet. I'm waiting for a lot of things. So right now, whatever somebody, whatever I add to Ultimate Insider, everybody gets, right? Because I'd really not wanted to necessarily do Successful Leadership Toolbox. I wanted that to be part of a different tier, but be that as it may, right now, for Ultimate Insiders, whatever, you get everything. But eventually, the next tier up is going to be that people are going to be able to offer master resale rights. But if you're there now, you'll be grandfathered into a legacy tier. Let's talk about how you do this with System.io. And so and again, I'm going to make the same deal with you that if you get System.io through our link, let me know, right? And then I will set you up with something. I'm not really sure what that is, but I will not leave you empty-handed if you're getting System.io through our link. That being said, oh no, I didn't want to do that. Let's see. that kind of messes up my groove. Let's go back to animate. Sorry about that, folks. Okay, yeah, I'm a creature habit. So let's. Okay. Okay, so once again, you're going to buy one license. So if it doesn't matter if it's master resale rights or resale rights, if it's a resale rights product and you're going to do this for a client, okay, your license technically does not give you the right to do this for somebody else. You will have to go and buy a license on behalf of your customer in addition to your license, right? So every customer you do this for, you buy a separate license. Now, you set up the course and the sales page in your account, just like you did in Go High Level. You're going to go into your System.io account. You're going to set up the course and the sales page. You upload the videos, you set up the sales page. And again, now, same thing as with Go High Level, we have the sales page template. So you could use the sales page templates that I have done, which is our standard sales page template, and you can edit those templates for the individual product that you're doing. Right. So I've taken care of the trickiest part of this already by giving you access to our sales page template. So you can use our sales page template and make the changes for the different products. And once again, I did the same thing that I did for Go High Level for our survival skills videos. I just did the sales page templates for you. And so they're in there for you to add to your System.io account. You're going to need to request access to their account. Now, I do not recommend you leave all this up to the customer, so don't just give them the share code. That's not the idea. So you want to charge them for this. You got to be the one to see this through. So please do not think, well, I'll just lower the price and I'll just give them access to the share code. The kind of person who will really benefit from this is not going to be technical. All they want to do is put their buy button on there, right? Which I do not suggest you do. Now, I suggest that you give them, and I've done the videos for System.io. Those videos will show them how to set up their own payment system. So don't get into that, right? Don't make any recommendations. Don't do any of that stuff. Let them choose their payment processor. They can ask you which ones are available, which one. You can say something like, I use this one personally, but don't make recommendations about their payment plan. Let them find that. Right now, you're basically going to open up a separate browser and then use the share codes, right? So you create the share code in your account, You open up a separate browser with their account open, and you share the course and the funnel into their account. That's basically what you're going to do. So the funnel and the course, same process. And then you customize it. So you go into there and you customize the platform. So, you work with it. I mean, do some, if you don't like the graphics, go into Canva and create something, right? You don't have to use the PLR graphics. And in fact, I suggest that you don't use them unless you're going to go the route of going to Photoshop and making some changes to it, changing the title and things like that, right? Which is possible. Now, if you've got some kind of software app that can change those PSD files and you can make changes to them, that I think is viable. Otherwise, just go to Canva and redo them. Let's talk about the value added again. Once again, the value add is the same thing. So you do the same thing to add value to this process. So you can interview them. So in other words, you say, I'm going to do an audio interview of you, and then we're going to use it to promote you and this product. Easy. And you don't even have to have, you don't have to have a YouTube channel or a podcast already. Now, those things help. Now, if you already have a podcast or you already have a YouTube channel, well, that's going to make that even more valuable. But even if you didn't, right, what you're going to say is, here's how what you're going to put on the sales page. That you're going to conduct this interview, and you're going to give them the interview, right, for them to use. Third-party credibility. So again, it's an upsell. And so not everybody's going to take you up on that. And you want to make it worth your while. So I said that, you've got to charge a minimum of $97. Maybe you say for, a 15-minute interview, it's $97. Because you're going to have to do a little work to, with the video and the audio. And if you want to charge more than $97, that's fine. But you've already gotten, you've already charged them $197, on the front end, or $297. This is just an upsell, right? If you interview them. A quiz, right? That's another upsell. So it doesn't matter if they don't get the interview, wonderful, add a quiz. Now, in order to do quizzes in System.io, the setup's a little different. So you're gonna have to set up each individual, what they call module, and then the quiz is going to be for the module, right? So it's a little trickier, but it's doable. Right. So you're gonna have to work within the parameters of System.io and do each individual question. Still works very well. You can add in a survey, right? And again, that's going to be another upsell, in the process. And then you sell the entire thing. So you're not selling them a course that they're going to use. You're going to sell, and you're going to set all this up. Now, the setup is easier if you do it this way. If you set it up in your System.io first, and you share it into their account, because you don't have to have them know anything. Now, here's the thing. Now, I said sell access to your agency as a subscription. What I should have said is you would get them to get their own System.io account through your affiliate link, right? So I don't know if you can make that a requirement. The requirement's got to be that they get it, right? Because you need a System.io account. And maybe what you could do is you could say you'll give them a price break if they get it through your link. Because why? Because you're going to be getting recurring commission. So, if they get a paid account, they get that through your affiliate link, discount some of the pricing, right? So to train them, right? If you're going to train them, they're going to have to know how to use the platform. And then we've got 4 courses, a 4-course series on this. I've got it listed here at plrshow.com/SYDI. You can get our course to teach them how to use System.io, but you're going to set the entire thing up for them the first time anyway. And if you don't know how to set it up, you can use our course to help you to set it all up. And once again, it's going to be easier if you do all this as an ultimate insider than if you are not, right? It's a lot easier to do it that way. Okay, so that's pretty much it. As I said, all these things are easier easier for me to provide content to you if you are an Ultimate Insider, you can do that at the plrshow.com/insiders. All of our content is 50% off the original launch price. So if I launch it at $8, that means then that, as an insider, you get it at $4, right? So even though our pricing is $27, you don't get half off of that. You get half off of what I launched to that if you're an Ultimate Insider. So you ultimateinsiders.com/insiders. That's where you become an Ultimate Insider. Any questions? Any questions about the method or any questions about what we're doing? Any questions? Who are we talking about? Santu says, who are we talking about? We're not talking about anybody in particular. Just in general. Okay, any questions? At the beginning. I honestly can't remember. I can't remember what I was talking about. Uh, uh, I don't remember, Santu, to be quite honest with you. Okay. Our friend Aurelius released something that's going to be expiring tonight at midnight EST. We did put a bonus and made that bonus available to you, so you can get our bonus and Aurelius's PLR until midnight tonight. I think our bonus is still going to be available even if you don't get it at midnight, but I know his launch price ends tonight, so you can get that there at plrshow.com/AureliusT. And then the folks at Fire Launchers, they've got something that they're doing. What are they doing? Microsoft Copilot, which I did already, right? I did the video version of that. I don't think they didn't cover how to use Microsoft Copilot Pro in the apps. And so I did a bonus video of that. Now my course, right, does cover those platforms in a little more depth, but you will have that bridge video, which I gave you as a bonus when you get Vikram's PLR there. Okay, so any other questions? Any other questions? Okay, everybody. Well, I appreciate you hanging out with me here tonight. I am going to be I'm going to be out starting on Wednesday, right? So I'm going to be out. Both Laurel and I are going to be out, and I will be back with you if God is willing on Saturday, right? So I will be in my seat hopefully on Saturday. I may be on the road, so it's possible I may not be in my seat on Saturday to be with you like I am every week. But if that is the case, then I will definitely let you know. Ultimate Insiders will be getting 11 labs this week, right? That'll be your selection for this week. And then the following week, I'm going to do the new version of ChatGPT, right? And that'll be for the following week after that. Okay, so any questions? Any additional questions? Okay, everybody. Well, thanks for hanging out with me here. Have a great night and a pleasant tomorrow. Take care.